Hey everybody, I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about how God will fulfill His promises to you. While it is absolutely biblical that God will fulfill His promises to you through His power and through your faith in Him, what is often overlooked is that God will also fulfill His promises to you in very practical ways. One great biblical example of this principle in action can be seen in Acts 27. In this passage, Paul is on a ship that gets caught in a terrible storm. And then Paul comforts everybody who's on the ship, and this is what he says, starting in verse 13. He says, "Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as He told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.'" And then if you skip down to verse 30, it says, "In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboats down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.' So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged the men to eat. 'For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head.' After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat." Then when you skip down to verse 43, it says, "The centurion ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on the other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely." So it's really interesting to note that Paul started out by telling everyone what God had said to him through an angel. God had promised the end result before it happened. However, this promise did not stop Paul from proceeding in very practical ways. Notice all the practical actions Paul still took, even though God had promised him safety. For example, in verses 25 and 26, it says, "For I have faith in God that it will happen just as He told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island." And then in verse 31, it says, "Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved.'" Or in verse 33, "Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat." And then in verse 44, "The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely." These verses show us that even though God makes promises to us, this does not mean we should stop living our lives in practical ways. Even though God promised that all the people on the ship would be saved, they still had to eat food. They still had to swim to shore. They still had to make wise decisions in an attempt to be saved. So even though it is God who brought Paul through the storm, God still directed Paul to make wise decisions in the midst of the storm. And the same will be true when God is fulfilling His promises to us as well. So if you want the promises of God to be fulfilled in your life, you should be prepared to follow God in very practical ways. Well, I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and even hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new content that we're putting out every single week. Well, thanks for watching and God bless.